What is your analysis of the likelihood of an attack by the US on Iran?
Oh, I think it's going to happen probably by the end of March, if not sooner. Cooperative intelligence operation. I believe it involved not just CIA, but Mossad and MI6 in Britain.
Iran's regime is now fighting for survival.
This was all planned. The crashing the currency was a consequence of action that was initiated by the U.S. intelligence. This is deliberate. Remember when George Soros basically crashed the British pound? If one man can do that to the UK, you telling me that the intelligence communities united can't do that to a country that's not as strong economically as the UK? Come on. And they knew that people are going to come out and protest, which they did.
Larry, how are you, sir?
I am well. Good to be with you, Mario.
Where do I start?
Oh, anything going on in the world? No, it's very boring. Quiet start to the new year.
So I was just having a conversation with the colonel just a few minutes ago, and we were talking about how everyone just moves their attention from one thing to another, and right now everyone's focusing on Greenland and what's happening at Davos, but people completely forgot that just a few days ago people were expecting strikes, U.S. strikes on Iran.
Yeah.
And what happened in those few days, not sure if you're probably keeping track as well, a lot of military equipment is moving to the region. According to various sources, we know for a fact the Abraham Lincoln, the USS Abraham Lincoln is on its way. They should be arriving there in the next couple of days. We've got a whole bunch of F-15 fighter jets that are heading in that to that region. We've got various aircraft, the various aircraft. We've got the Pegasus, we've got the Stratotankers, the Globemaster. With that military buildup that's happening right now, and when you look at the rhetoric on the Iranian side, they keep telling the US, don't strike or they'll be held to pay.
Yeah.
And then various people within Trump's administration saying, especially Senator Graham saying, it's not over. Like, he gets upset whenever someone says, why did Trump change his mind? What is your analysis of the likelihood of an attack by the US on Iran?
Oh, I think it's going to happen probably by the end of March, if not sooner. Look, this initial attempt to take down Iran was an intelligence, cooperative intelligence operation. I believe it involved not just CIA, but Mossad and MI6 in Britain. And the planning for this started a long time ago. This is nothing that just developed out of the thin blue or because there were, quote, protests in the streets over the economic policies of Pezeshkian. This was all planned. So the crashing the currency, the Iranian currency on December 28th, that was I believe was a consequence of action that was initiated by the U.S. intelligence community.
More than this, not just the sanctions. You're saying it goes beyond the years of sanctions.
This is deliberate. Remember when George Soros basically crashed the British pound? So if one man can do that to the UK, you telling me that the intelligence communities united can't do that to a country that's not as strong economically as the UK? Come on. So, and they knew this was designed because when you get that kind of economic crash, people are going to come out and protest, which they did. These were legitimate protests. They were angry at the government of Pezeshkian for economic mismanagement. They were not angry at the Ayatollah Khamenei. This was not a call to overthrow the Islamic Republic. This was more to, slap Pezeshkian upside the head and do something. And Pezeshkian started responding immediately, got rid of the central banker. But what we then find out, now that we now know, that there had been Starlink terminals that had been smuggled into Iran, months and weeks prior to this event on December 28th. And it wasn't just a coincidence. It was launched on the 28th because Netanyahu showed up on the 29th at Mar-a-Lago, and was the plans between Trump and Netanyahu were to discuss what the U.S. was going to do militarily, what Israel should be prepared to do militarily, talk about the risks that Israel would face because the United States was going to attack at some point. I believe it was a week ago last Tuesday. And then with those Starlink terminals and with weapons that had been smuggled into Iran, uh, these dissident groups began acting, following the playbook that was used in Maidan. Put some snipers out there, shoot into the crowd of protesters, kill some protesters, try to further inflame and enrage the situation. This appeared, at least as it was being reported in the West, was like spiraling out of control. Uh, the night of January 8th, and then into the early morning hours of January 9th, Iran moved to shut down the internet. And in shutting down the internet, they shut down the Starlink terminals. Once they cut that off, these protests dried up. And in fact, what we did see were millions of Iranians take to the streets, not to protest the Ayatollah Khamenei, but to protest in support of Khamenei. And what made that so significant is this was being done with the internet down. It's not like you could argue they used the internet to gin up this, rent-a-crowd. It was at that point that the people briefing Trump on the impending military operation had to tell him, we can't guarantee that it's going to be that the military strike will be decisive and tipping over the government and forcing an abdication by Khamenei. So they called it off. They postponed it. And they're now still moving military personnel and equipment to the region. They're going to do it. And the big difference this time is, unlike on 12 June, the 12-day war that started June 13th, this time Iran's got the full backing of Russia and China. They didn't have that before.
More than during the 12-day war.
Oh, they didn't have it before. In fact, Russia had actually proposed a mutual defense treaty along the lines of what it has with North Korea. And Iran said, no, we don't want that. It was like they preferred to do it on their own. So up to that point, Iran really was trying to do it on its own. And part of it was driven by religious belief. They didn't want to be put, Iran has never been a country that's launched attacks, preemptive attacks against others, despite Western propaganda. The numbers are quite clear. And yet the West persists in pushing this mythology that Iran is this irredeemable terrorist state. They've carried out all these terrorist attacks, all lies, but that's the storyline that the West runs with.
So when you say the full backing of China and Russia, how far do you think China and Russia will go? How far will they back Iran in this war?
There are at least Russian technicians, soldiers on the ground operating air defense systems. China has also provided air defense systems. China reportedly, in this latest, in shutting down the Starlink terminals, played a very important role in that regard. So they're not. I don't see China or Russia standing idly by and letting the West just come in and attack. Because China's also got an economic interest here. Iran's made it very clear: if attacked, it's going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Strait of Hormuz accounts for 45% of the world's oil production on a daily basis. Comes out of the Gulf. So you tell me what the economic impact of turning off 45% of the oil to the world. Those countries that are oil producers that are outside the Persian Gulf, they'll be doing great. Russia will be its oil will be a hot commodity. Nigeria, those are the major ones. But
what do you obviously it's going to be a godsend for Russia. The US is getting further distracted and oil prices are up. But going back to Iran, what do you make of the numbers that we've seen, the brutality of that crackdown? Would you trust the numbers that are coming out of there of 15 up to 55, 15, 20,000? The low numbers were 4 to 5,000. That's on the low end, and up to 15, 20,000.
Understand that much of the number and information about what was supposedly happening on the ground in Iran was being generated by Western intelligence. Okay? Go back to 2004. In 2004 in Iraq, the United States had incarcerated the Mujahideen al-Khalq, MEK, a terrorist organization put on the U.S. list of international terrorist groups in 1997. And they had been carrying out terrorist attacks since 1964. They were variously described as a Marxist Islamist group. There's a weird combination for you. but the CIA started working with him in 2004. And then by
A
2009,
Marxist, I can't get this out of my head, a Marxist Islamic group.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Think, oh boy, that's like a platypus, you know. So, so the CIA started using mech to carry out terrorist attacks inside Iran. There were a number of news outlets with Iranian dissidents outside the country that were pushing news stories that were portraying, mass deaths, protests. Uh, During this entire process, I've talked to both Professor Morandi, but then also Nima Al-Rashid. Nima he's a professor, an engineering professor in Brazil, but he grew up in Iran, got his degree in Germany, and then moved to Brazil and has been living there for 12 years. So he just went back on December 25th for his first visit for his
Shit.
parents. Yeah, and yeah, it was a great timing. But he was telling me from the outset that I was sharing with him what was being reported in the West, and he was going, "We're not seeing that." He says that's not what's happening. Um, then when the violence started, again, it was very localized. One of the things you can do, when I was with CIA, I worked the propaganda arm of the Afghan task force for 8 weeks. They were in my first year of training. We were getting exposed to certain areas, so I got to see how the propaganda is done, and that's what we were witnessing. It was the information that was coming out of Iran was more to shape public opinion in the West, to convince the West that there was all this upheaval, all this support for the alternative, for the Shah, the son of the Shah, and that there was zero support for the Islamic Republic. It was just the opposite. In fact,
Mm.
the millions who came into the street following that were they again, the internet was down, so there was no way to gin up that size of crowd through social media because
But the
social media
crowds,
wasn't.
but for the regime supporters, they could easily rally those supporters if the internet is down. The internet is being used by the opposition
Yeah, yeah,
protesters. The regime
yeah,
protesters could just be rallied by TV. I think there were calls on TV by the regime for them to hit the streets.
yeah.
I'm not
But
saying I'm not saying so. Just to kind of give you my stance, so you understand where I stand on this. I'm very critical of the regime. I also know that the sanctions played a key role. It's all a strategy to weaken the regime to a level where people are fed up with the economy. Now you added a wrench to the discussion by saying even the collapse that they were just collapsed could have also been initiated by the intelligence. But even if that's not the case, the sanctions alone just crippled the economy for so many years, and
yeah.
that made the people suffer, made people rise up against the regime. Now we know Mossad's admitted having assets on the ground. I think it's no secret. I wouldn't be
Oh,
surprised if the
Mike
CIA.
Mike Pompeo said it as well.
There you go.
Former
There you go.
CIA director. So,
Uh,
so I'm not making some fantasy up. This was an orchestrated operation by intelligence. The thing to
mm,
understand, there is a difference between being upset with the government. Let's use the UK as an example. If somebody hates Starmer, does that mean they hate the king? No, no. It could be just the opposite. And what you've got in Iran right now is there maybe a majority of people that dislike Pezeshkian? Sure. But that doesn't mean that they want to get rid of the Islamic Republic. And again, the propaganda that the West floods its people with. And I was in a conference call a week ago Tuesday with a retired 4-star general, and he was referring to how the Iranians have killed thousands of Americans. It's not true. Go to Grok, go to whichever, take any of the AI platforms you like, type in how many American civilians have been killed by Iran since 1979. The answer I got off of Grok was 0 to 50. Okay, well, let's look at these proxies. Iran uses proxies such as Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Type that in. The number that comes back, fewer than 700 over, 47 years. Okay, how about military? Surely, because there were Iranian proxies that were attacking U.S. soldiers that had occupied illegally Iraq. The number fewer than 1,000. Now, I'm not trying to minimize those deaths, but if we use the same standard of a country using a proxy to attack another country, which the United States did to Iran in 1980, working with Saddam Hussein, encouraging Hussein to attack, providing the precursor chemicals that were used to produce mustard gas, 500,000 Iranians were killed. And the West wonders, why do those Iranians chant death to America? Because we have killed so many more Iranians by multiples than Iran has done to the United States. And Iran has always been reacting, not proacting, reacting to the United States. We talk about the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon, October 1983. Well, what the hell did the United States battleships do in September of 1983 but shell Shia Muslim positions in the Bekaa Valley, killing Shia Muslim civilians? And then we're shocked when they retaliate and kill Americans? Mario, this is the problem. We have been gaslit over the last 47 years to believe that Iran is this awful, terrible person. What Iran has been doing has been fighting to try to defend Shia Muslims in places where they have been repeatedly attacked and murdered by Zionists. That's a fact. And the United States has gone along with it. We haven't intervened to say, hey, we got to have a fair thing here. And it goes back to 1953 when Kermit Roosevelt, the son of Theodore Roosevelt, helped lead the coup that overthrew a democratically elected government. So America sits around in its ignorance, wondering, why do those Iranians hate us? They hate us because of our freedom. No, they hate us because of what we've done. And yet what's interesting is you don't find this visceral hatred among the Iranian population. They generally like Americans. They'd like to get along with us. It's us in the West that will not leave them alone. Now, what's changed with the sanctions, you're right, you are absolutely correct about the sanctions and the terrible cost it's inflicted upon the Iranian people, but that's changing because Russia and China were willing to back such sanctions 10 years ago. Not now. They are in the process of forging new economic relations with Iran that will start turning the Iranian economy around within the next 2 years.
So then what is the logic behind it? If Iran is not a threat to the US, Iran doesn't want to be a threat to the US. We saw that in the 12-day war, a very symbolic strike on the Qatar base. They did not want US retaliation. They've always they've been preparing for a war with Israel, not saying they want a war with Israel, but trying to avoid in any way, any means possible, any conflict with the US. So what is the purpose of the Trump administration targeting Iran now?
Ask Miriam Adelson, who gave Trump $250 million. I mean, Trump's been completely bought and paid for by the Zionist lobby. Look at the influence that is wielded in the United States by these rabid Zionists. This doesn't mean Jewish. This means we got Christian Zionists that are leading the pack. Some of them, look at Mike Huckabee. So this is not about anti-Jewish. Heavens no. Because look, some of the strongest people opposing the Zionist agenda are Jewish. From Jeffrey Sachs, Max Blumenthal.
I think we're past. I'll do it for you. Yeah. We're past the days of anyone convoluting a Jewish and Zionist. Anyone criticizing Israel is not criticizing Jews. I think people are over that argument. The argument's kind of lost steam. So you're essentially saying Israel's influence is the reason that Trump will eventually strike Iran.
Absolutely, because again, they don't pose a military threat to us, and they've not. The Ayatollahs have been first Khomeini and then replaced with Khamenei. They've not attacked a single other country in the region where their armies have gone outside the borders of their country and they've taken and occupied another country. In fact, they've been the victim of that. The CIA has had operations going underway for the last, since 1979, 1980, out in Baluchistan in the east. The reason I know that, not because I had access to some highly classified information, but that's what I was told by one of my friends who was in a top secret U.S. military unit that was working to rescue the U.S. hostages from the embassy in Tehran back in 1980. And he told me about one of the ways that the information was being communicated to the U.S. Special Operations Forces was via a rug store in Bethesda, Maryland. It was called Parvizian. I literally lived behind that store. And when I found this out later, because the rugs were coming out of Baluchistan, messages were hidden in the rugs. That was one of the ways they were communicating with the intelligence community. So we've
Through
had
rugs.
this long. So what?
Through rugs.
Yeah.
You mentioned Baluchistan. There's a big concern that I have, and that's why, despite my critique of the Iranian regime, the reason I'm critical of the Iranian regime is I feel they put ideology sometimes above. So their foreign policy is very ideological. Now you can agree or disagree with their ideology, but I feel it is at the disadvantage of the people. If you look at other Gulf nations, they took a very different approach to foreign policy, and their economy is doing a lot better by not being an enemy to the US or Israel. Now, obviously, there's always a counter argument to be made there as well. And this does not justify a strike on the country. But my biggest worry about a strike, though, the biggest concern that I have is what happens next, especially in Iran. We're not talking about Venezuela, which is, not an ideological nation with all these different ethnic groups. Iran, just like Iraq, Syria, etc., they've got all these different ethnic groups, including separatist groups as well. You've mentioned Balochistan. You've got the Balochis, the Sunnis. They've got their roots in Pakistan. You've got the Kurds, obviously the separatist movement in Syria. They're clashing with Syria right now.
Right.
The PKK in Turkey. You've got the Arabs with roots in Iraq. You've got the Azeris, small to some extent roots in Azerbaijan. So these are the groups. There's more ethnic groups here. So I've got the Lurs, the Turkmens.
Yeah.
You've just got that melting pot of all these people, and some of them do want to separate from Iran and have their own nation. If there is that power vacuum, what happens to the country?
Oh yeah, no, it'd be total chaos, and there'd be more death and destruction. Now, let's remember as well, where outside of Jerusalem, what country hosts the oldest living Jewish community?
I'm not going to try to answer.
Tehran.
Wow.
Yeah, they still, and they are they are Iranian nationalists as well. That's what's really pretty odd about it. Similarly, when you look at the Armenian Christians, see, again, the way that Iran is presented to the world is that Iran hates Jews, hates Christians, and that it's only devout Muslims. And again, this reflects just an ignorance about Shiaism. The Shias are not the kinds of fanatics that the Sunnis are. The Sunnis, literally, known as takfiris, they go out and kill people for being apostates. They view all Shia Muslims as, the hardcore Sunnis view Shia Muslims as unbelievers, people who have deviated from the true course of Islam. But you find that, in fact, the Armenian Christian church is still alive, protected, not persecuted, and operating with some of the oldest church buildings that go back to, I think, 3rd or 4th century. So my only point in this is that the United States is prospered off of propagandizing the nature of the Iranian regime, and Iran has made gesture after gesture after gesture of trying to reach out and accommodate the United States, but we won't have it. And part of that is we owned it. We used to control the place, and then once we lost control, we got angry.
Exactly. After, what's his name, the Shah, post Mossadegh.
Yeah.
That's sad. Like the strategy, just seeing it unfold. As much as you want to hate the Iranian regime, for people that do hate the regime, and there's obviously a lot of people that don't, just seeing that playbook unfold, where you just sanction a country to an extent where the people start to suffer, the people rise up, you support the people to rise up, and then that would weaken the regime, and it gets to a stage that happens again and again and again. They've been through so many protests or revolutions, where it gets to a stage where, all right, now the regime is weak enough, now it's time to strike. Now, if that strike leads to a peaceful transition to power, to a new leader, hopefully democracy, which doesn't seem plausible whatsoever, then fine. We have a new regime, a new leader. Maybe they do better governing the country. They manage foreign relations better. They manage the economy better. But that's not how regime changes happen. And more
Right.
importantly, who's the opposition leader? The Prince Reza Pahlavi, or it's not Prince now, Reza Pahlavi, he does have some support, but not enough to be able to replace the supreme leader. And the regime change in Iran just sounds like such a crazy idea because the regime has such a stranglehold on the military force, on the army and the
Yeah.
IRGC. They separated them into two groups. So it's very difficult for the army to rise up against the regime because there's the IRGC there. So I just don't see any path unless Trump's plan is not regime change like we saw in Venezuela and is more of a tactical strike to force the regime to some sort of concessions, maybe on the nuclear negotiations. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. For this reason, Iran takes pride in being an one of the oldest civilizations in the world. It's not just some newbie. They have developed a very advanced ballistic missile capability. And in fact, if you recall, at the end of the 12-day war, it was Israel pleading with the United States to broker a halt to the missile attacks because neither the U.S. Air defense systems or the Israeli air defense systems were able to stop it. And again, this touched off an argument within Iran between those who wanted to continue and those who said, no, we can work out. There's still this hope that they can work out a deal with the West. I don't see it. I think we're headed for this inevitable conflict. But what has changed now is the relationship between Iran, Russia, and China. Iran's role now in BRICS is quite important. Iran is also another significant supplier of oil to China. So the Chinese also have, if you will, an economic investment there, as does Russia with the setting up of the North-South corridor. So this is, ultimately, a lot of this goes back to settling the situation with respect to the Palestinian people. Do they have a right to live or not? And Israel has made it clear there's no two-state solution. That the Palestinian people they're going to be exterminated.
A lot of Iranian people, though, are saying that similar to what the Lebanese people have said in the last couple of years, is that we empathize with the Palestinians, but their currency is collapsing, their economy is collapsing, they're running out of water, their infrastructure is suffering. So a lot of Iranians are saying, focus on us, put our country first. Even though we empathize with Palestinians, we're suffering as well.
Yeah.
Could we see a massive shift in Iran's foreign policy as well? Like say after these protests, because we saw that after the 2022 protests when it came to the hijab, they relaxed their
they did.
Their religious police relaxed the enforcement on the hijabs, especially in major cities like Tehran. Could we see the same thing here after this big punch to the nose that Iran has had, assuming no strikes happen or maybe a limited amount of strikes happen? Could we see Iran shift their policy? They already got closer to Saudi. Their relation with Saudi has improved from what I've seen recently. Their relation with the UAE is improved as well. Saudi reports that Saudi and the UAE and other Gulf countries urged Trump to cancel the strikes last week. Not sure how much truth there is to that. And could they start to at least explore a long-term path to maybe normalize relations with Israel, similar to what Saudi, the UAE, and other countries have done or are doing? So could we see a new Iran coming out of this, a more positive Iran? When I say positive towards the West and less confronting to other Gulf countries and to Israel?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think as you enumerated it earlier, that the battle plan of how you use sanctions to try to weaken an economy and therefore weaken support for the government, that playbook was run effectively in Syria. Now ask yourself the question, is Syria better off today than it was a year ago?
Since 2011?
Yeah, I'd say no.
A year ago, I don't know, Larry. A year ago, I'm a bit more hopeful. I could be, completely wrong. I may be the president who's ex-Al Qaeda, could end up being a horrible person, but maybe he ends up doing a deal with the Kurds, and somehow he does change and give him another chance. He actually unifies the country. My worry is that it gets assassinated by maybe Israel or someone that wants to see a weak Syria, not a reunited Syria. But I'd say Syria's incomparable to what it was in 2011 under Assad, whether you love him or hate him, horrible guy, horrific guy, evil guy, whatever you want to call him. Syria in 2011, any Syrian would tell you they would love to go back to that Syria than the Syria we see today.
Yeah. Well, there's Syria is not the only country which has had former terrorists as leaders. Menachem Begin, he was leader of the Irgun terrorist organization in Israel. Yitzhak Shamir, the Stern Gang. So, that's why I have a highly developed sense of irony when it comes
to Nelson Mandela.
Yeah, where you got different people that have been engaged with terrorist acts or attacks on civilians, and then they rise to political leadership.
Nelson Mandela was labeled as a terrorist by a few, not in the same basket as these guys, but he was labeled a terrorist by some. So that's why I want to give Al-Shawar another chance.
But it's one thing to label him as a terrorist when it's Western propaganda. I mean, I saw this firsthand at CIA. One of the South African analysts at the time. So this was like 1989, 1988. It was 1988. The request came from the White House. They wanted to know, is Mandela a communist? And Bob Gates was the director of intelligence at CIA at the time. That sits atop the analytical section. And the analyst's name, well, I won't say his name. He wasn't undercover, but he wrote an assessment, and basically the bottom line assessment was that Nelson Mandela was not a communist. He had these associations, affiliations, but ideologically, in terms of policy, was not a communist. Bob Gates only changed one word. Took out the not. Took out the not. So I've watched firsthand how senior people in Washington, D.C. will deliberately lie and change information in order to paint a particular picture to justify any kind of horror.
Yeah, the terrorist label is one of the most overused terms we've ever seen. Terrorist organization, terrorist attack, a terrorist person, a terrorist. But yeah, so going back to, you're using the example of, I was asking you about a changed Iran, and then you brought the example of Syria and how Syria is today. So it really depends on what Trump's intent is. Whether it's to strike a deal, he is the deal maker. He wants to be the peace president, despite what we saw in the text message to Norway, to the Norwegian Prime Minister yesterday. Did you see that?
Yeah.
I didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize, so I'm not inclined to be the peace president anymore. But I still think he cares about peace. And I'm more hopeful that he will not. I don't think Gulf countries want to see a civil war or a destabilized Iran. I don't think they'd be too happy with that. And he doesn't want to piss them off again after Qatar.
Well, right. Well, in fact, look, right now, Iran's got better relations with Saudi Arabia and UAE than UAE has relations with Saudi Arabia. In fact, they're fighting. They're at odds and backing different sides down in Yemen. So, and Iran's it used to be portrayed as a war a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But again, Russia and China played a major role in bringing that reconciliation together with Saudi Arabia. I think the key to focus on is, are the Saudis and the Gulf Arabs, are they going to continue to buy U.S. Treasury bills and support the U.S. economy, or are they going to start dumping bills and move off into gold and silver and develop stronger economic relations with the BRICS countries? I believe it's the latter. I believe it's the latter, that's where it's headed.
Trump doesn't want that. So that could be a good deterrent. If the Gulf nations join forces with Russia and especially China and a few other countries to start pressuring the administration more than what Israel's placing on the administration, making all these assumptions that Israel's playing a role, which I think it is, pressuring Trump. I think Trump would not want to piss off all these countries, and I don't think he would. I'd be very surprised if he seeks regime change.
Yeah,
but
I don't see him backing off now. But he's gonna continue. And let's jump back to Greenland for a second in terms of what does it mean to get control of Greenland. I mean, seriously, let's put it down into concrete terms. that because right now, as the situation stands, you can't point to a single request from the United States that was turned down and rejected by Greenland in terms
Mm.
of, hey, can we fly on these planes? Can we deploy these soldiers? Can we have these ships? Over the last, 70 years, I'm not aware of a single time that Greenland and or Denmark turned around the United States and said, hey, stay the hell out. So what does it mean to, quote, get control of Greenland?
Do you want me to read out? I'll
Because,
read out the post for you, if you, Larry, as you
yeah,
speak about it. The one that just came out before this interview by Trump. The markets have been ripping, by the way, while we speak. All the markets just I think the market up by a couple of percentage points after that tweet. And what he said is the following: based upon very productive meeting that I have had with Mark Rutte, Secretary General of NATO, we have formed the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland and, in fact, the entire Arctic region. This solution, if consummated, will be a great one for the United States of America, and all NATO nations, which includes Europe. So, great deal for both sides. Based upon this understanding, I will not be imposing the tariffs that were scheduled to go in effect on February 1st. Additional discussions, etc. So, are we done with Greenland? Is that no longer an issue?
yeah, I get you're trying to figure out what was this issue all about. Because let's say I could understand it if Greenland and or Denmark had told the United States, stay out, don't bring your forces here. We don't want to have anything to do with you militarily. Well, that never happened. Or the notion that, oh, Russia and China are getting ready to attack Greenland. Russia already occupies, just by virtue of its position, its location, its northern border, it already has ample access to the Arctic. It's not lacking that, number one. Number two, it's resource rich as a country already. It doesn't need additional resources out of Greenland. So that was all just a red herring, a complete
Similar
distraction.
to Venezuela and the drugs, yeah.
Exactly right. Because
So what
you
is
go
it?
back
What's the whole? What was the strategy there with Greenland?
I,
Is he
I
pressuring
honest,
NATO to step up? Was there something else behind the scenes?
I honest to God don't know. I've heard that one of the Trump donors actually saw some financial benefit of an investment up in Greenland. Maybe that's it. But again, we step back and look. People say, well, they need to get the rare earth minerals. Will people stop with this rare earth mineral crap? The United States has enough rare earth minerals here in the United States. It's 30 miles from where I live, Mosaic Mine. They
Well,
got
the processing,
piles.
that's the issue.
That is exactly it. That's exactly it. And the only country that's really got the processing capability
China, yeah.
is China. Okay.
That's the thing with rare earth minerals. They're not really that rare. People think they are, so they don't need Greenland. They don't need more rare earths. That's more than enough. They need the processing capabilities. What do you make of this part of this
Yeah.
comment? The sentence I stopped just before that last sentence. Additional discussions are being held concerning the Golden Dome as it pertains to Greenland. So, do you think that he needed some sort of access or something he doesn't have at the moment to be able to build that Golden Dome? Maybe NATO contributes financially to building the Golden Dome. Is there anything there, maybe?
No, there isn't. I mean, look, the United States is so far behind Russia and China in terms of air defense systems. It's going to take years to try to catch up. I don't think they'll actually ever catch up. Look right now that Russia has operationally deployed and demonstrated combat effectiveness with 5 different hypersonic missile systems. They travel in excess of Mach 5 and they can be maneuvered. Even Iran has at least one hypersonic missile. U.S. doesn't have any.
But what about
Zero.
the Patriot systems? I thought they would have the most advanced air defense
No.
systems.
Oh heavens, no! The Patriot systems are, they are technologically inferior. They're good at taking out. They can take out some subsonic missile systems, but they have no. They're ineffective against the hypersonic missiles, and so. The United States has relied upon that. They're just, and the problem with the Patriot missiles, they're terribly expensive to use. Now, I've seen 2 different estimates for the cost of one missile that goes into a Patriot missile battery, between $3 and $7 million, depending upon the type of missile. Normally, you have to fire 2 of those, and in some cases 4, to take out an incoming missile. Well, do the math. if you fire two $3 million missiles at an inbound missile that costs $1 million to make, you can't sustain that economically too long. Plus, there's limited production. So, and if they think they're going to magically produce a golden dome, as Trump calls it, there's nothing. The U.S. has yet to demonstrate it can deploy something that's effective. The Patriot missile is overhyped.
How do you explain the Russian air defense systems and the lack of effectiveness in Venezuela and in the 12-day war in Iran? Now, in Venezuela, I think you explained it in the show we had last time. You think there was a stand-down order. A few people think that.
Yeah.
So is that the explanation there? And what do you make of Iran as well?
No, I know there was a stand-down order. I was in communication with someone who's involved with the person who was giving the turn-off order of a senior Venezuelan general. So, yeah, there was a stand-down order there. And in Iran during the 12-day war, the only S-400 system in country was at a nuclear power plant that was down in the southwest corner of Iran because Russian personnel were there working, and that didn't get attacked.
Oh, that's the only place that had an S-400 air defense system.
Yeah. So okay. They didn't have any of the other advanced systems. They do now. That's what I was going to ask you. How's their capabilities today relative to the 12-day war? Iran's capabilities dramatically improved because 2 days after that 12-day war ended, Iran got back on the phone, called Moscow and, basically said, you remember that offer you made us about helping us out on the defense side? Does that still stand? Russia said, yeah. And so what you've seen is multiple missions of defense IRGC and Iranian army officers, chief of the defense chief, going to Moscow, meeting with the defense ministry and other parts. Same thing with China. So the Iranians have been very active, and vice versa, the Chinese and Russians have been active in sending military transport aircraft, quite a few, into Iran. So Iran has rebuilt a capability that, frankly, it hasn't rebuilt it. It's now deployed a capability it did not have prior to June 13th.
So let's say America's goal is a complete regime change, a destruction of the current regime, maybe even a strike on the supreme leader and the rest of the leadership. So if we look at a worst case scenario, and if Iran's regime is now fighting for survival, how far will they go in their retaliation? So obviously they'll strike Israel. That's a given. Obviously they'll strike the US bases in the region, Qatar, the UAE, Saudi, etc.
Right.
What will be the next level above that? Could they start striking the city centers in the Gulf to pressure the Gulf nations to then pressure the US to stop the strikes? Obviously they'll try to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, but that could hurt them economically. So what would be the Iran's counterplan to a U.S. strike?
Well, take out the military bases. I don't see them going after the government centers in the Gulf, because and one of the things I'm sure that they are dealing with diplomatically behind the scenes is letting the Saudis know, the Qataris know, the Emiratis know that, hey, if we're attacked, we're going to have no alternative but to shut the Strait of Hormuz. And that's one of the reasons I think that it impacted the decision of Trump to call off the strikes a week ago Tuesday, that he heard from the Saudis and the Emiratis said, no, this is going to cost us too much economically. I think really the biggest risk out of this is Israel will be brought to the brink of military destruction, and faced with that will be tempted to use a nuclear weapon in Iran, and which then will push this off into a whole new territory. Because Iran, from a ballistic missile standpoint, has enough to cause significant permanent damage to Israel that would dramatically reduce Israel's military and industrial capability.
Whew, that's a pretty big statement. I thought Israel did pretty well in their 12-day war. Now, I'm not saying they did well. They did pretty well without American support. So I think both countries suffered. Iran suffered more than Israel. Israel suffered more than they expected. But if you add the world's biggest military into this conflict, I just can't the US just essentially pulverize Iran's capabilities more than Israel did in that 12-day war, making it much harder for Iran to strike Israel. So they've got about
No,
2,000
yeah.
ballistic missiles, not ballistic missiles. They've got 2,000 missiles left in stock at the moment, according to various estimates.
Oh,
And
that's ridiculous, Mario. No,
it's a lot
they're
more.
probably those probably sitting on at least 20 to 25,000. I mean, they've got their industrial capability has not been destroyed at all. Uh, the Israelis happily put out, oh yeah, they've, you know, remember we saw this early on in the special military operation in Ukraine. Do you remember in March we were being told, oh, the Russians they're running out of missiles. They've only got a few weeks
Mm.
left. April, oh, they're running out of missiles. No, it's gonna in March, May, April, June, July. It kept going on. Russia's just weeks away, days away. They're running out. They had thousands. Same thing is going on with Iran
That
because
changes a
Iran's
lot.
capable. Yeah, they're buried underground, and they've been preparing for this contingency, and they recognize what his. You could fault the Iranians for being terribly naive and having been way too trusting of the West, and not being serious, taking seriously what Israel was really ready to do to them, but not now. They've sort of awakened from that slumber, and they are now prepared. Uh, the United States and Israel failed to stop what Iran did in the early days of that. The first 6-7 days of that 12-day war. They fired off drones and old missiles to soak up, to deplete the air defense system of Israel and the United States, which in fact it did. And then they brought in more sophisticated missiles, and they were hitting targets. They hit critical refineries. They hit critical military installations. Israel sat on it, but subsequent reports from like Channel 14 in Israel came out and admitted. And there's some videos out there online where you see the devastation that was wrought upon Haifa, as an example, and Tel Aviv. So this next go round, I will be much more devastating for Israel if it gets to that point. And they put out the good propaganda spin. Oh yeah, we shot down all these missiles. If that was the case, why did they have to go to the United States and plead for the United States to intervene, make a deal with Iran to stop? Because part of that Iran, that quid pro quo, Iran allowed the bombing of the nuclear sites. Iran was allowed to blow up the satellite system at Al Udeid, but Iran was then allowed to trade oil with China without hindrance. So,
So would you say that that explains the reports that Israel and Gulf nations both tried to convince Trump not to strike Iran last week?
yeah, I think so.
That's just
And
to
yeah, and plus, United States wasn't fully prepared. But
yeah.
again, they had counted this intelligence operation that was run against Iran by the intelligence services of the West, had calculated that they would have destabilized the regime to such an extent that that if you hit them in the right place, there would be a legitimate chance that they would collapse. Now, what we need to step back and look at is ask this question. The United States, through the CIA, has been doing this for the last 79 years, starting in 1947, where we keep affecting regime change, whether it was Arbenz in Guatemala, Mossad in Iran. They go down to we did it to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. We did it to Diem in Vietnam, Allende in Chile. So this notion that all we got to do is just kill this one guy, get rid of this one leader, and things will be great. Okay, we've got a historical track record. Where has that turned out to be a good thing, that it has created stability, prosperity, and peace? I would argue that the overwhelming evidence points to just the opposite effect. And at which point then you got to step back and say, why do we as a country in the United States insist upon this kind of meddling in the internal affairs of other countries, when it would be nice if we could just sort of fix ourselves here at home, fix our own problems? Because I look at what goes on in the inner cities in places like Baltimore, Philadelphia, Washington D.C., Chicago. The number of kids, minority kids, that can't read and write at grade level, can't do math at grade level, and yet we're out spending literally more than $1 trillion to boost military capabilities to go overseas and cause the deaths of other foreigners. I just I'm tired of it myself. I don't think it just violates humanity in my view.
The counter argument for Iran, so I agree with that, by the way. The counter argument, though, is that Iran is a source of a lot of instability in the region as well. If you take out Iran, you finally might have peace in the Middle East. You've got the power struggle, the proxy wars between Iran and Saudi and all these different countries, and Yemen, UAE now as well, in Yemen, in Syria, and Lebanon, etc., and Iraq. And once you take out Iran, then essentially the Middle East now, all the big players are all allies with the West. So we won't have those proxy wars anymore. Lebanon won't have that instability in Hezbollah being a military power there, for example. Is there truth to that as well?
I don't think so at all. Again, I view that as just part of this Western propaganda play. And understand that at the CIA in what used to be called the Directorate of Operations when I was there are entire offices that are dedicated to manufacturing narratives, spreading those narratives in order to get people's minds shaped around accepting something as true, which in fact it is not. And the spread of social media has made that job actually much easier. I mean, good Lord, when I was doing it, we were dealing with having videotapes made. People were out in Afghanistan filming documentaries that we were then putting out, and we were getting stories placed into newspapers and magazines. And it wasn't, so that required a lot more work. But today, it's so easy with bots and other things that you can flood the zone with a variety of narratives. Like one of the things that was circulating with respect to Iran was showing this woman, lighting a picture of the Ayatollah Khamenei.
Iranian woman in Canada. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it was being portrayed initially as, see, she's standing up in Iran and doing this. And then, and that's sort of the beauty, though, of like what you're doing, because you're not under corporate control. You're able to ask questions that other mainstream media won't ask. You're able to explore subjects that mainstream media won't. Look, I was a TV pundit. I first appeared on CNN in August of 1994. And after that, I was on not only CNN, I was on MSNBC. I was a Fox News analyst for a year. I appeared on the CNN show Crossfire probably 18 to 20 times. I was on the Jim Lehrer News Hour. I was on ABC News Nightline with Ted Koppel probably 12 different times. I mean, I used to be, I was a terrorism talking head. All that went away in 2008 when I was critical of Barack Obama. And that was where the corporate media got control and started shutting out alternative voices. So today we rely upon people like yourself to get other voices out there where we can present information and ask people to go check it. Like what I said about Iranian terrorism, I encourage everybody watching or listening, go check it out for yourselves. It's not my belief. Those are the actual numbers. If you total it up, the United States has killed far more civilians and military personnel in Iran than Iran has of Americans.
No, that's a fact. I think you can't dispute that fact.
Yeah.
I think even people that hate the regime won't dispute that fact. They'll try to twist and turn it and try to link Iran to a lot of the instability we've seen in the Middle East. They'll try to blame them, rightly or wrongly, to what we've seen in Syria and Lebanon, etc., Iraq. Obviously, if you want to blame someone for Iraq, you shouldn't be looking at Iran for what started it all. The last thing I want to ask you, Larry, is what does that all mean for the biggest war that we're all facing right now that no one's talking about, right? Except us deep in the weeds, and that's the biggest war since World War II, the war in Ukraine. Yeah. What does it mean for Putin? What does it mean for Zelensky? With Greenland, let's say it's settled now, as we saw the post earlier today. But if we do see a conflict in Iran,
the war in Ukraine is in the process of winding down now, or we're in the latter stages of it. The fact that the lights have been turned out, general winter is now fully engaged. And what I mean by general winter is the winter weather, the falling temperatures, the lack of power to heat water, to keep homes lit. Um, that's forcing evacuations of the major cities. And I think part of that is a design strategy by Russia. Get the civilians out, get them out of the cities, so that when Russia attacks, they're not going to be killing civilians, but they will be killing military personnel and further weaken Ukraine's ability to resist. I don't see this war in Ukraine going on for another year or two. I think
Could Russia suffer if Iran's capabilities, if Iran's in a war, they can't export their drones to Russia? Could that weaken Russia even if
Oh no, no,
slightly?
no. Russia now is not relying upon Iranian drones. They did early
They've copied
on,
them.
but now, yeah, I think you may be aware or not that Iranian copy was a copy of a
Yeah.
U.S. drone.
Sorry, the Iranian copy is a copy of a US drone.
Uh-huh. Yeah, the Iranians downed a CIA drone in, I think it was 2011, 2012. They got it, and then they took it in and re-engineered it. So it's hilarious. You just can't make this stuff up.
So essentially, the war in Ukraine is winding down, and
Yeah.
do you think we could see a peace agreement before Trump's term ends?
Well, there will be a settlement. It'll be an unconditional surrender by Ukraine. Russia.
Including the four oblasts.
Well, it's not just the four oblasts. In fact, they're going to. What Russia will probably wind up doing is they will hold votes in Dnipropetrovsk, in Sumy, Poltava, Kharkiv, and they'll give each of those current oblasts of Ukraine a chance to vote to join Russia. If they vote to join Russia, then Russia will add four new
That's a lot more than the terms that are being discussed in a 20-point peace plan that Ukraine's already not agreeing to.
Yeah, and that's what Russia's already made clear, that was what was coming next. And if you recall, about 3 months ago, there was a briefing that General Gerasimov gave, and then behind him was a map that showed Odessa as part of Russia. That wasn't just, they were sending a message. Before this is over, Russia's going to control Odessa. They'll control the entire Black Sea coast. And Ukraine's going to be cut off. And it'll be up to Ukraine to figure out, will they make a deal or will they commit suicide?
Larry, always a pleasure to speak to you, sir. Hopefully next time we speak.
Yeah, on that beautiful note.
Exactly. I think my guest next time would be on the show would probably be talking about the strikes or the beginning of the war with Iran. That would be my guess on the next thing, but then you never know what could happen.
I hope we don't ever have to talk about that. I really do.
I hope so. That one's scary. That one's worrying. Iran is a population. It's what, 3 times bigger than Iraq, I think.
Yeah,
it's 4 times bigger. It's 93 million people. It's
93 million country. Plus, not counted in that, an estimated 15 million Afghan refugees.
15 million.
Mm-hmm.
The region would not be able to deal with that. Imagine
and then
to leave Iran with those numbers.
You're correct in drawing attention to the size. Iraq is 4 times the size. Iran is 4 times the size, physical size of Iraq, and it has much more rugged territory, the mountains in the north in particular. So the notion that the United States is going to go in and conquer Iran from the air, oh, come on. We couldn't do it in Iraq. And understand, 2003, 23 years ago, the United States combat aircraft was, I think, 40% larger than it is now. In other words, the size of the U.S. combat aircraft has shrunk in the last 23 years, not expanded.
I agree. Hopefully we don't have to talk about this again. Hopefully this is the last time we talk about Iran. Larry, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you so much.
All right, my friend. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, sir.